Today, I interview Dale Wheatley. Dale is a writer, producer, actor, and his recent book, Too Real, couldn't be more aptly named. I've changed the thumbnail for this interview so many times trying to get the tone right, because I really want to ask the questions that aren't salacious, that aren't digging into the private lives of famous people. However, these famous people have changed Dale's life, and he wants them to be accountable for their actions. And I find that fascinating. I want to know what drives Dale. In an age where we're increasingly finding out the transgressions of our heroes, did Dale's film accidentally expose some of our biggest stars by mirroring too closely what they were like behind the screen? Is telling the truth in Hollywood the most dangerous thing you can do? Speaking truth to power is the cliche, but not many people do it. Let's find out why Dale Wheatley was too real. Thank you for joining us.
That was wild. Yeah, that was really wild, man. I mean, it's a dramatic situation, but that was fun. That was wild, man. That was really cool.
This is a 500-page book. And there's so much in there, and I've absolutely loved reading it. It's so honest. I think it's probably the most aptly titled book I've read for a long while. Is it about, lionizing people and people having power before they have the emotional capabilities to actually learn those social skills and learn how to treat people and learn how to work when they have power? Is this about power dynamics, a lot of it?
I think it is. Yeah, I think it's a lot about the not just power dynamics, but also how power changes, both like how it grows and how people change with it. But it's certainly a book about power, a lot of abuse of power. But yeah, absolutely.
So the idea of being too real. I know when I watched the film, particularly the Tobey Maguire's character and Leonardo DiCaprio's character, I wonder how much of that is kind of reflected in age. I was trying to be kind of watch it through a lens of being a 40-odd-year-old and being roughly the same age, and how I behaved when I was that young, and try to, give the benefit of the doubt. But is there just the kind of a naughty kid element to some of those characters, or a spoiled element to some of those characters that maybe they saw as being a side of themselves that they just didn't want other people to see, do you think?
Well, I don't think that was the case for anyone other than Tobey Maguire, in terms of, right, if you're asking if there's like cast members who were worried about how they might be portrayed, or how they might be thought about afterwards. And I don't even think that, Tobey really cared about that, beyond the fact that as I sort of go into a little bit in the book, is that I think that he is, potentially somebody who ended up creating an identity as he was going along through his career, which is really what I think all of us do as we go through whatever phase of life where we're kind of building our careers and, kind of projecting ourselves out into the world. And in Hollywood, you do that, a lot based on the kind of roles that you think you can really hit and do really well with, and that are also in demand. And, Tobey, I think, found this sweet boy image, or this sort of innocence in his younger roles there with Ice Storm and sort of onward, that I think when he made Don's Plum, I don't think he had that in mind. When we were making Don's Plum, we were very much swept up in the art scene of independent film at the time, and it was a place where it was a time when expressing ourselves freely was really encouraged. It was something we all did as much as we could, and we explored deeply a lot of the themes of our lives and our growth. And so I think Don's Plum's like the movie is just a sort of a grand collision of reality and fantasy and anger and truth and hope. Really, I think it has all of those things. I think it's like, a movie that, like, when you watch it without the controversy in mind, or when you watch it without being judgmental over the fact that it's a $100,000 art house film, or that it doesn't start out with a big, explosive, nonlinear cold open of some weird thing happening, but instead just gradually builds and takes you on a journey through a period of time and through characters and struggles and all these kinds of things. Gone a little bit about it, but it's a far more complex movie than I think it shows on the surface. And I think that as far as Tobey and whether or not he or anyone felt like they exposed themselves too much, in retrospect, I think Tobey did feel that way, and that's why he did what he did. But when we were in the act, it was just a sort of a an unabated artistic attempt at expressing ourselves in a time and in a place.
It's interesting that you say about how he presented himself, or how he was maybe later on came to see how he was viewed and worried about that image. That when he was in that deposition and the way he was performing was really interesting to me. The facial expressions, it was almost like a kind of like a Jack Nicholson performance. He was doing the sort of the eyebrows and the smiles and things that you wouldn't do. Like, certainly if I was sat on the stand somewhere and someone was asking me questions in a legal capacity, I wouldn't necessarily be performing in that way. And I got that more from Tobey Maguire, which made me think maybe a bit of pop psychology, I guess. But I was just like, I don't think he knows how to be himself.
Yeah, he might have been uncomfortable. I don't know. I mean, he was a wild guy. When we were friends, and when I didn't realize sort of his capacity for his dark side, I found him to be wildly compassionate. I found him to be passionate about everything he approached, disciplined in many ways, and he had a lot of really great qualities that that eventually sort of were overshadowed by some kind of greed. The only thing that that it really boils down to for me, or the only thing that makes sense to me, is that it boils down to greed. Because at the time that we made the film, we performed in it knowing there was 3 cameras, right, like pointing at us at all times. Do you know what I mean? Like we had, and it was film. This was before the digital age, so not only did we have operators there, but we had assistant cameras, we had loaders, so we had there was a staff behind shooting 3 cameras at 8 actors. So we were all very much aware of what we were doing, and the contributions that we were making because we felt they were meaningful, artful, entertaining, and relevant to the moment and the theme.
So to say that, so that kind of adds to the power of your argument, really, doesn't it? So almost to say that we accidentally made this film, kind of kind of unravels when you realise the scale of it and the thought and planning and structure that went into it. The argument about reshoots and the amount of people and time and energy, that evidence is really there, isn't it, to support the fact that this was, like you said, a large scale for an indie movie if you compare it to, say, the budgets of some of the other theatrically released indie movies that were out at the time, that were being made on credit cards like Clerks or Slacker.
You're absolutely right. It's an impossible argument. It's a legal statement that they're trying to make, but it really worked because because people don't understand like what goes into making a film. They don't understand that like Don's Plum is an intentional look. That we took a 16 millimeter film and we blew it up to make it look grainy and awful. We had a particular idea in mind when we were doing that. We wanted to make our lives look look more, something like, more historic, we'll say, I guess, or antiquated compared to the sort of contemporary themes that we were going to be exploring through the film. As far as like, the length of the film and stuff like that, it would be okay to, like, it would be okay for me. I can accept that Leo may have believed that he was in a short film. I can accept that at the time that he shot it. I can totally accept that because there was a little. We were completely unaware of what we were doing. Like, we didn't know what we were doing. We knew we were making a movie, but we didn't know what movie we were making. We didn't know to the extent of the movie we were making. You know what I'm saying? Like, we were improvising. We knew we had something cool going on, but we had no idea what was about to happen. And as the movie unfolded while we shot, it was growing and being written. I mean, we wrote the movie through the whole weekend that we shot most of it. So it was this beautiful collaboration, and it was incredibly spontaneous, but yet it did have a bunch of structure and rehearsals and character creation, and there was a bunch of work that went underneath it. But when it came to shoot, we just lifted up the dam and let the water flow.
Yeah. I know I sent you a message about the chapter where you talk about that conversation you all had after watching Mike Leigh film, and how it kind of got that spark going. That Mike Leigh makes those films and they feel so honest and immediate. And I definitely got that from Don's Plum, because also another thing that Mike Leigh's films often feel like to me are uncomfortable, and there's definitely uncomfortable moments in Don's Plum as well. Do you think that that kind of is that one of the reasons why it's so frustrating as well, to know that all of this, the genesis of it all?
Yeah, I mean, it can be. I mean, are we speaking about just general, like, the public?
Well, I'm thinking
like
maybe like some of the. It's almost like a propaganda kind of approach to pushing that narrative, I suppose. If you were to read a couple of articles about Don's Plum, it kind of have that sort of thing, like, oh, they were just hanging out in this restaurant and the cameras were rolling, which is kind of how I've read some of the things about it, and I'm like, well, that's not true, because obviously your book clarifies that it isn't.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that bothered me, and you're right, it is propaganda, and it's propaganda that I think started as, even prior to Don's Plum's settlement, but certainly afterward. I got my first strike on YouTube because I put up a there was the National Enquirer did a TV hit piece on Don's Plum right after we settled, and I mean, it was such a hit piece. Now, during the Johnny Depp trial, the second trial, during that trial in America, we learned about how National Enquirer, takes money from celebrities to throw out spin stories. And this one was to me, it's so obviously that, and I can't prove anything, so I'm not going to, pretend that there's any kind of fact here that I can prove that Leonardo DiCaprio and his people were able to put out a hit piece on Don's Plum. But I know that that's what they've been doing. The sentiment about Don's Plum is that the tragedy behind Don's Plum isn't just that these men decided that for their own purposes they would destroy art and the work of all these incredible artists. Jenny Lewis is an absolute stunning revelation in the movie, especially in the 90s. She's also somebody who went toe to toe with Leonardo DiCaprio as good as any other leading lady he's ever worked with, in my opinion. Her performance was lost over their personal reasons, egomaniacal reasons. Is absolutely infuriating. I think it's shameful that DiCaprio, Maguire, anybody in the business would purposefully and maliciously defame and destroy a piece of work that was at the time incredibly acclaimed. Like, we had, there was a very high expectation for Don's Plum on an art house level. What happens is when I talk about this movie, I'm often like, people are often trying to paint me or mistaken me for being arrogant about it, or that I'm unrealistic or delusional about what the film is. I know exactly, what Don's Plum is, It's a damn fine art house film. That's what it is, right? It's just a little movie made by a bunch of young first-time filmmakers filled with passion, filled with a drive to tell stories about themselves and about the world in which they live. And and we succeeded. And that's all that Don's Plum is. Don's Plum is a success story that was, maliciously taken away from those who made it happen. Not just me, not just Artie Robb, but Jenny Lewis, as we were talking about a moment ago, whose performance I think is as good as any opposite Leonardo DiCaprio, any leading lady opposite Leonardo DiCaprio. Very raw, very rugged. We know that, right? We know it's, part of the reason why I call the book Too Real is because thematically it rings through everything that I am as an artist. I think one of the cool things about the book is that the book, I try to put you in the place. I try to put you in the world with me.
Yes.
And not try to sit just as a narrator trying to tell you what happened to me and then, but rather I try to take you in there and hear the conversations, be the fly on the wall. We put our hearts and souls into that movie, and that movie is, in its own way, a beautiful representation of art house cinema in the 90s. And, we think we captured something really important, and so did a lot of distributors. So, of course, it's definitely frustrating, and it's also entirely disappointing that anybody would even think to do something like that. I think it's shameful on their part that they would shame this movie in any way. To have a dispute with us is one thing, but to try and pretend that artists didn't pour their hearts out into a little art house film, and instead showed up for some kind of DV movie or whatever it would be back then is patently absurd and embarrassing in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned Jenny Lewis. I'm a big fan of her music as well, but and one character or one performer that really stood out for me was Amber Benson, because she has this vulnerability that she brings to a lot of her work. I'm thinking of her work in Buffy. She's really in touch with her emotions. And when I talk about the film going to uncomfortable places, I think to kind of see that character stand up or not back down when you've got a real dominant personality in your face is something that you don't get to see a lot in, certainly in movies around that time. There was a lot of big cool male characters who kind of have really long monologues. But what I liked about those female characters in this film was they had a backbone.
Yeah.
That's something that we don't want to lose, because it is unusual, certainly I think, for the time period.
Yeah, we Don's Plum has all these writers on it. It was created by David Stutman and his writing partner, and then RD and I began writing it, and it became apparent to me that we needed a female voice in the writing room, especially at that time. I was very much a baby writer, and so there was a lot that I wasn't going to rely on in terms of my ability to write characters. I feel much stronger now than I can write women now and feel confident. But back then I felt and feel reasonably confident. I have my wife, thankfully, to be able to check me on it, because we brought on Bethany Ashton, and we did that to get as close to, we wanted our women in the our women characters to be extremely strong, because we actually, part of what we were sort of attacking in this movie was a lot of the tropes, the cliches, and sort of the stereotypes. And one of the stereotypes that was still very sort of a problem back then, I think, was this sort of male dominant world. As a matter of fact, in the original when in the scene where Leo and Jenny, Derek and Sarah are in the bar making out, and Leo gets too aggressive with her, that whole thing was laid to James Brown, Man's World. It's a man's world.
Oh, okay.
And there was a dichotomy to that, and it's so beautifully laid in there. This is a man's world, and all that scene is going on. I mean, it gives me goosebumps just thinking of how powerful it was, because what we wanted out of all of that, what we wanted out of that scene, and what we really wanted out of the movie thematically, was that women were gaining strength, and that men were floundering in that, and that there was a growing power to women, and that it was an intimidating thing for men. It was really what we were after, And I
Oh
think we
yeah, where
got,
she's
you know,
laughing, when she's laughing at him, and when she sits so close, which female characters in films don't tend to do because of the fear of, getting a slap or getting, physical, because there's nowhere else for that man to go. And I really got that. He'd said all the things he could say, he'd shouted all the things he could shout, and she was still right there. And I found that quite a powerful, but also quite a scary scene in a way. She played that so well.
yeah, I thought so perfectly. I thought she played it perfectly. And to your point with Amber Benson I think Amber Benson also, like, there was this, the book gets into it. It's like kind of a fun, I think, time in the book. But her, and this is where the sort of the brilliance of Don's Plum the brilliance of Don's Plum is an interesting thing to say, right? When I say that, it's like I'm the writer, I'm the producer of it, and what I try to make very clear in the book is that I was a participant in all of it. That Don's Plum is like what I consider, that what happened to Don's Plum is something that I think happens to a lot of works of art, where it sort of almost comes alive in itself and in its own thing. And so one thing that I love about Don's Plum is it naturally grew. So when we showed up, just days before we showed up to set, Leo had a change of heart about working with Amber Benson, and instead, because we were improv, and this is what Mike Lee did to me, this is what he did to me, and why I'll never not love this man. He always made me want to figure out how to like get it in to everything. It was like, oh, this is going to happen. I'm going to get it in. So I just always wanted to get it into the work. So as soon as that happened, as soon as Leo objected to Amber Benson feeling that she might not be strong enough an actor for him to go toe to toe with, we had to find a way to work it into the script, and we did. And the way in which we did was to create that conflict between them, and I think that's where Amber really shined as an actor and really gave us this opportunity to sort of split, the whole sort of theme right down the middle, where we now had this woman who was kind of unhinged and losing a bit of control over the abusive men, where then later, with Jenny Lewis and in that really beautiful scene at the end that I think is probably one of the strongest scenes in the whole movie, is where then the woman rises sort of to her own power, and where the man is kind of left cracked, if not a bit shattered. So I loved all of that. It's just really cool.
Yeah, he's emptied out all of his playbook, all of his toolbox of masculinity and like coolness and all of those things, and she's just kind of taken them all and sort of battered them to one side and continued to be a strong character. And I guess that's what's interesting. I like the fact that her character, Jenny Lewis's character, and Amber Benson's character are so different. They're not just the girls sat at the table. And when we don't want things like that to be lost, that like you say, that is the frustration. I understand what you mean when you say about, you're talking about the collective and all of those moments and all of those performances from different people. I'm kind of interested in your take on maybe the culture of what you were into or got into, sort of, your moral compass. How did that kind of, when you met the group and when you became part of that group, coming from a different background and coming from you'd done other jobs, you'd not just sort of, grown up in Hollywood or anything like that. Did you have like alarm bells of certain behaviors, or was it just a case of we're all young and figuring it out?
Well, Hollywood's kind of an interesting thing, especially when you start chowing around with really young actors who are kind of born into the business, or who began very, very young when they were in grade school or or thereabouts. Forgive me. So so there's a weird there's almost like man, how do I put this without insulting everybody who lived there during this time? I think that there's a certain amount of there are certain people who just don't develop quickly enough, because I think they're like almost in a capsule. So what happened was that there were things that were going on around me that were incredibly immature. like things that you do when you're playing spin the bottle at 13 years old, and you're like things get out of hand, and embarrassing things that you never have to really worry about, because when you grow up and you become an adult, they're behind you and nobody really wants to talk about them anymore.
Yeah, it's not documented.
And so these guys were doing those kinds of things, not forgotten, at least, not overly exposed and stuff like that. But that's how I looked at it. I looked at these guys just being silly, being kind of like, underdeveloped. I really do. I think that they're underdeveloped. I still feel that way. Why is Leonardo DiCaprio tossing women out at 25 like he does? Because he still isn't past 25. He's still living in 1990, whatever it is, and so, or 2000 or whatever.
Just thinking, it's like a lot of things. It's like the P Diddy thing. It's like it's a joke until it isn't.
Right. Well. So then the line that gets crossed, and of course P Diddy, if what we hear is true, or at least part of it, even, he's a criminal, right? He's a god awful human being. If any of that is true, and I think that like what I'm talking about is certainly sort of like the beginnings of that. I really do. Like, in terms of if you're getting into things like sexual humiliation, or you're getting into these things that, I was playing the innocent idea of spinning the bottle when we're 13 years old. The things that I witnessed were far more salacious than that, and far more humiliating and horrible, in my view, at least, and misogynistic. And there was just a myriad of problems that followed some of the things that I witnessed DiCaprio and others doing. But I don't know. I mean, there's to get to the Diddy level, to get to the Bill Cosby level, to get to the Harvey Weinstein level, there's a lot of complicity, and that complicity comes from the idea that you want to be close to these people and the life that they have. Leonardo DiCaprio is a red carpet ride into Hollywood, into the movies, into fortune, into beautiful women, into pretty much anything and everything that the human condition desires for some reason here in these modern times. And so, I think that what happens is that they get emboldened, and so it starts out as these things that we can say, wow, that was really fucking humiliating and shitty and you shouldn't have done that, to then something far more nefarious and then eventually even criminal. A lot of people have asked me since all this Diddy stuff broke up whether or not I thought Leonardo DiCaprio would be a part of the criming, and my answer has been no. But my answer is that I think it's quite possible he was there. I think it's quite possible that he was there and didn't say anything, because this is the culture that enables and emboldens these people to do these really horrible things. And it starts with these, these things that they get away with. Here's an interesting story for you, a very quick, interesting story. I can't remember when it was, but Leonardo DiCaprio and George Clooney were playing basketball. And George Clooney was doing an interview, and he was describing this basketball that they were playing, and that he'd learned at that point that Leonardo DiCaprio could really use some people around him who tell him no. And that was more or less what he said in this, I think it was a Vanity Fair article, and Leo got pissed. And it wasn't 2 weeks after that thing landed that George Clooney was put out a statement clarifying that, it wasn't any kind of slight on Leo. So it just...
that's so funny.
Yeah, so
I was just thinking the power of no, the having people around you who say no.
Yeah, it's the difference, I think, between a socially balanced, mentally balanced person and somebody who's completely out of control. When you look at dictators like Kim Jong-un, is that his name? Or any of them, they're going to have everybody saying yes, right? Then they literally kill the people who say no, or at least some of them. So, yeah. It's an emboldening, it's a complicity, and it's all because there's a desire to be close to the action, close to the money, close to the power, close to the fame, close to the delicious food. There's just so much you get. It's all free, it's all wonderful, and it all comes in association with these people. And so the end result is art gets killed, lives get destroyed, nobody cares because or they turn the other way. The other thing is, it's not that people don't care. I was in the 90s when Harvey Weinstein was now we know raping women, right? Yeah. And I was there. I met him during the time in which he was criming like this. And what trickled down, and I mean, when I say trickled down, I knew people who reported directly to him and spoke to him on a daily basis. And what trickled down to me was that was it was painted in a way that was just awful. It was more painted in a way that the women were opportunistic women who would sell their souls to get into a Harvey Weinstein movie. And it was not that, right? But that's what was coming down. And this is how all this sort of culture gets emboldened into a place that becomes that ends up in a place where we're all like dissing on Hollywood, and people got their torches lit and they're ready to burn Hollywood down. And I keep telling people it's filled with wonderful people. We don't need to burn Hollywood down. We need to stop these really nefarious, malicious, egocentric humans from destroying other humans for the sake of their egos and their money and their pleasure.
It's interesting how, there's a little part in the book that I think maybe people might miss, but I won't like read the whole thing or anything. But there's a moment where you move to Hollywood and you're getting hugged a lot by people, and you just to say hello, people you don't really know very well, and it takes you back a little bit. Because hugs, I'd imagine, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like hugs are kind of reserved for people you know, or friendly with, and that there's a kind of slight difference in how people interact. And I was wondering if that awareness of the difference is what's kind of alerted you to the things that were wrong, and allowed you to draw those lines yourself and say, no, that's wrong, and it doesn't matter how famous or popular or successful you are, it's still wrong because I don't see it the way you see it. I'm wondering, why are you giving me this hug, rather than, oh, if I hug this person, then we're best pals.
It was just like this in LA. There was like this like sort of almost incremental invasion of my personal space. Like they just kept getting closer to me. Like, why are we getting so close? Do we have to be so close? I was born in I'm Canadian, and I don't know that matters necessarily, but my family wasn't a very physically affectionate family at all, and so it was very strange for me to be hugged by people, and for no particular reason, except to say hello.
Same.
I'm like, really? I mean, it's just hello. I mean, hello to you. Must we touch?
Yeah.
But it's weird culturally. Like, I call them Hollywood hugs because it was like you hugged everybody, and I never really understood why. But in Hollywood, if you were somebody, or they thought you could be somebody, everyone was quick to be friends, quick to say I love you, to hug you. And I would imagine that still goes on today. It was going on in 2010 through 2012 when I went back and did a sort of little second stint in Hollywood. Yeah, it's just, I think, a part of their culture is where they you want to be friends with these really famous people and these powerful people. So if they look at you long enough, we're friends.
Yeah, like that. Yeah, it's as simple as that. And I did think that, and you said about being Canadian and stuff, and that struck me because I always think, from people I know who are Canadian, obviously this is very anecdotal. I can't talk for every Canadian, but the Canadians I've met seem to have this cultural understanding of decency, or at least sort of fairness. And you mentioned a bit about if somebody takes your beer, they get hockey punched. And that made me smile because I can think of a few people I know who are Canadian who would do the same.
Yeah. Well, there was a big cultural difference. Like it's interesting. Like Canadians and Americans, even Canadians and Americans themselves, kind of look at each other as almost interchangeable, culturally. But we are very culturally different. We have sort of some very stark differences, and that kind of go through almost probably every part of Canadian versus American life. And certainly for me, one of those was like going to a party, you bring your beer, and that scene still makes me laugh today because I was mortified walking into this house without beer. I was absolutely, Meadow, I write, grabs a beer for me and hands it to me and then gives me a little pep talk about how I got to take care of myself, because I was just mortified about this idea of like taking something that doesn't belong to me, even if it's actually offered to me. it was weird. It was weird going to parties in Hollywood where things were supplied for you. I don't know what it's like in England if that happens in England, but in Canada, you got to bring your shit, especially when you're a kid. You know, like adults, they throw parties and they have things for adults, but like 20 years old at a house party, you bring beer, you bring whatever, you know, all of your intoxicants, you know.
I'm trying to think about that because I had a friend visit this weekend and he brought some beers and then we didn't get round to having them because we were doing something else. And I was like, "Oh, do you want to take them back?" And he's like, "Oh, no, you leave them." And I'm like, "No, you take them." And we're maybe the British culture is more to argue over over like being kind to the other person. Like, yeah, like who's the kindest? You know, like aggressively kind or aggressively polite. I suppose the word is more than kind. Yeah, or apologizing, you know. So the impression I get from that and that culture, and the reason I bring up the sort of the culture of things is that I think again, you could just tell me, no, Matt, you're completely off beam here, but maybe that's what's given you the strength to stand up against this because you're kind of steadfast in your own morals. Would you say that your background, your real world experience has given you that sort of strength to say, no, I don't care who you are. This is a lie. This is wrong, and I'm going to challenge it.
Well, that's interesting. I think that I have always grown morally. So I don't think I'm the same person morally today that I was in 1995. Well, so I guess you know, it really wasn't morals that drove me to want to fight for this. What made me want to fight for Don's Plum and was Don's Plum itself. Like I think that, you know, as you get older, as I've gotten older, first of all, you know, they stopped my career, right? They halted it. I couldn't even get like people in other states to work with me and do my own films. They'd happily have me work on their films, but on my own work, that no one would touch me, no matter where I was in the country, because of the blacklist. Because selling my films, I would have to work under. Like I had people say, "Well, if you don't want to work under your own name," like just crazy stuff like that. So, but other than that. You know, as far as like, so you know, so there was you know the blacklist, which you know, I've had to live with, and that was certainly a motivational factor because I'm a reasonably talented individual. You know, I mean, I'm in this really terrible place where I have to tell people that I'm talented because I can't let my work speak for itself most of the time, and because it's either disparaged or defamed, or you know, or you catch it on YouTube in an absolutely like disgusting, like there's a version of Don's Plum on YouTube that is sped up that people watch and they're like, what the hell am I watching? This is the most horrible thing. Well, it's sped up. It's not only sped up, but it's at like a 480p resolution and sped up. And so the sound is muffled. I mean, you know, there's just all these, you know, obstacles that Don's Plum is faced with in the degradation of it. So these are all the factors that made me fight for it. It's like, you know, people, well, and then of course there's my work, you know, at 50, I'm nearly 55. And it's like, okay, well, I guess if this is going to be it, then I'm going to fight for it. You know, I'm going to make sure, I mean, I was always going to fight for it. I mean, there was always going to come a time when this was going to come to a head. You know, in my heart, I knew this was always going to come to. I was never going to accept. I say after it all blows up to Artie. I don't know how, I don't know when, but this is going to change, right? Like, there's no, there was never a doubt in my mind that this was unfinished business, and it remains so. You know, there's so many reasons that I'm doing this. Yeah. As far as my morals go, I mean, I'm not trying to be morally superior to anybody at all.
No.
You know, if you're a bad person doing bad things, you've got to face your demons the same way that I do if I make my mistakes. This isn't a moral play for me. This is like but you know, as far as decency goes, like, yeah, I live a decent life. I don't lie. I don't cheat. I don't steal. I make mistakes. I stumble, and you know, it's not possible that one of my mistakes might affect your life in some way, you know. But I've never. I don't go through life maliciously ever for any reason at all, you know. And I do think that they have, and they do, and so that's a problem. And so morally, we're different there. But I fight for Don's Plum because Don's Plum is a work of art that deserves to live a life like every. I'm a Canadian living in America. I have a fucking birthright to this movie, and before I die, I'm going to try to restore it to its basic constitutional freedom of being allowed to exist and being allowed to earn money. You know, we live in America that is, for better or for worse, a capitalist country. You know, they took my right to economic prospective advantage away. They took my right to earn away. So there's just all these reasons why this had to be fought for. And, you know, one of them is my talent too. You know, I'm a talented guy. I can make films, and I've been forced into a place where I have to prove it in a way that like includes me sitting in interviews like this and having to explain my way through it because my work, my life, and my character has been maligned.
Well, one thing I will say is that you know it's a great book, and one of the
Thank
things
you.
about the book that stands out for me is that you know you could read that book, and the thing that would put me off would be maybe like bitterness, but I don't get a bitterness from it. I get a warmth actually from you. I was going to say from your character then, but I get a warmth and a care that even when sometimes I'm actually reading it and thinking, I don't know if I would be feeling that way towards that person. And, you know, nearing the end of the book, you talk about certain people and relationships with the people. You talk about, you know, being proud of Kevin Connelly and, you know, Scott Bloom and things like that. You talk about maybe that. You know that Ethan Suplee has kind of grown up, and you know he's got a family now. You talk about all these things, and like you're not mitigating for them and saying so it's all okay. But what you're saying is that you know I've grown, they've grown. I can see the things that they've done in their life, but you're not sort of saying, for want of a better phrase, like just fuck everybody and let's burn this all down. You know, there's no bitterness in it, and I think that's quite a difficult thing to do with a book like this, where you are essentially righting wrongs.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. There are, you know, I have bitter days. I have bitter mornings.
Sure.
I have,
Like
there
for
are,
me, the tone of the book doesn't come across as bitter. In fact, there's
right.
some warmth. There's some warmth there for a lot of the people, even when we get to you know page 490. There's still a lot of warmth for a lot of the people.
Yeah. Well, so you know, I think that I think there's a general lack of separation from what is a problem between people or a problem in a situation and say the people themselves. Like
Hmm.
I don't believe that Leonardo DiCaprio tramples through life just abusing people. I just think he has a tendency to do it, and he did it to me. I don't think that Ethan Suplee wakes up every day and thinks about how he can, you know, violate people or, you know, be party to, you know, sexual humiliation. You know, I think that
Hmm.
Ethan Suplee made mistakes, and I think that what I wanted to show was that there was a balance in my thinking, and there always will be a balance in the way I approach. There's always a balance in the way I approach life. Like I don't think of things as one way, just because they might be presenting in a certain way. You know, if you suddenly became hostile, I wouldn't think of you as a hostile person. I would think of you as a person being hostile. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. It's something I certainly in teaching that you know I've always subscribed to myself, which is like separate the behavior from the person, and you know obviously it's hard, isn't it? Because sometimes as when you're trying to be a kind, decent human being, you can sometimes almost make excuses for people. But that's not. I don't think that's what that is. What that is sort of saying this is something you did rather than this is something you are.
Exactly, and that I also wanted to I wanted to show clarity Like I'm not sitting around here just like a lot of people kind of like to characterize me, since this is a 3 decade problem of mine, that that I live here in this sort of like weird obsessed, really like ultra focused, place, and it's not like that
Mm.
at all. I can observe everything that's happening around me. I can see the good and bad in everything that happens around me, and I just don't want anyone to misunderstand, what's going on in this process. This is about one thing and the behavior around that one thing.
Mm.
And I think that the behavior that they displayed at times was despicable, and I think it's on display in the book. But
I would agree.
that doesn't mean they are despicable. It just means that they behaved despicably, and
Mm.
and they are behaving despicably today as it relates to Don's Plum, and I just want that to stop. But I'm at that age now where it's time to fight for it. It's time to be like, fuck it. I don't have much more time on this planet. I certainly have less time left than I started with, or that I had when this dispute began. And so I want to like express, like I said, I'm a reasonably talented guy with a desire to express that talent through whatever. And so, when the pandemic hit, I knew I needed to respond to Leonardo DiCaprio because, as I stated in the preface of the book, I did an interview with the New York Post, and at the end of the interview, Leo, through his publicist, called me a liar, and he also said that I was stealing from our movie. And I was just thinking, there's this really super powerful guy. I mean, he immediately got emails, right? How do you respond to that? And
Mm.
and I'm like, wow, I don't have the voice, I don't have the power. This guy can lie with impunity, and he can, defame me with impunity. No lawyer will take my case. No lawyer will take my case. Leo's power is so unimaginable. Like for this book, I had New York Magazine, Far Out Magazine. I had all these major news outlets, and they were like, we're on board. We're gonna cover this book. This is awesome. And then all of a sudden, and I have this I have receipts of this happening throughout this whole dispute. Everybody just starts changing their mind. Sorry, I can't do it. I can't do it. So
Mm.
I'm sort of up against this giant, and I guess I kind of digressed, and I apologize.
No,
Was it?
I think the context. I think that all comes down to the context of your story is really important for people to understand it. It just so happens that the context involves a lot of people that people have heard of, and
Yeah.
and those people also have a lot of power. And I was thinking very much about when you see famous people speaking to senators about different things. They've been called to testify. I think the Terry Crews one, I don't know if you've seen that. I thought that was quite interesting, where he was
I saw
sexually
parts. I didn't see
touched.
it all.
Yeah, and I was watching that, and he was just saying, and then the producer rang up and said, "You've got to stop, otherwise you're not going to be in the next movie." And they were like, "Oh, and were you in that next movie?" And he's like, "No."
You know who touched
And
him? He's in my book. The guy who touched him.
oh wow, oh what a
Yeah.
coincidence,
Leo's
or
agent,
not?
Adam Bennett.
Right. Oh wow. Oh, and of course he said he was going through this. He goes, and what happened to that guy? He's like, oh well, he's in more trouble. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah,
So it all
Adam
ties
Bennett.
in, doesn't it?
Well, that's the wildest thing. Like people who read this book in Hollywood, and if you're like somebody who likes to dig in deep, like this book is riddled with like characters and underlying stories of characters like Adam Bennett. But yeah, Adam Bennett, accused of this inappropriate action, was also the agent in part involved in the destruction of Don's Plum.
And
It's
you've also
unscrupulous.
been very careful to protect people as well who you know maybe. I think you said like it would be their choice to share their story.
Yeah, yeah. We're talking about Emily Foster.
Hmm.
Yeah. Did you want to talk about it?
I mean, we can do it's totally up to you. I just think that that's just again it adds more to the context where it's not just a case of let's get some name. But people might think this is a Hollywood expose, and I don't. I read it. It's your story that has Hollywood people in it.
Yeah. Thank you. It's it's so weird to have to say this. Like, oftentimes I'll see in comments for interviews I'll do, And people would be like, "Oh, this guy's just dropping names." I'm like, "Well, I mean, did you want me to change them? I mean, they're the fucking people I was dealing with. I mean, I don't know how to help you except to say that I met Jeff Goldblum. I don't know what to do about that except that it was him."
Yeah.
And
If it's like
really
John Goldblum, it's not. It's not gonna. John Goldfarb
right,
and
right,
Leonardo
and
da
like
Vinci. It's not gonna work, is it?
no, no. And then of course there's this old truth about that, which is like if you're going to change the names, you have to change them far enough to so that people can't follow the trail back. But I changed Emily Foster's name, and like just for your viewers, what I try to do with this book is show where I observed abuses of power. Look, there are embarrassing moments for this book, or in this book for many of the people who are in it, who appear in it, particularly Leo and Tobey. And it wasn't about embarrassing them. There are so many things that I could have written to embarrass them. There's so much more that they did. They were wild and crazy nut guys. I mean, they were just nutty. They did crazy things all the time, and embarrassing things, and things that they definitely would not want the world to know about. And they're not in the book. And the reason they're not in the book is because they were harmless, stupid, ridiculous, whatever things. Right? The things that appear in my book are events that I think show a propensity for abuses of power in some form, whether for self-pleasure or to advance themselves in some way or to extract information or whatever it might be. But there's always some kind of an abuse of power present in the moments I outline in my book. So on Christmas Day in 1995, I was smoking a cigarette out on the porch of the condo in which I lived. And upstairs on the second floor where everyone was hanging out, there was 2 bedrooms, 1 bedroom. It was almost like a social bedroom because it was really large. And a lot of people would go up there during the parties that we would throw there, and they would drink and do whatever. And that's where everyone was. And while I was downstairs smoking a cigarette, apparently, Leo and a very famous television actress whose name I changed to Emily Foster for the book, they end up in my bedroom. Some person comes downstairs, I can't remember who it was specifically, but they're like, "You gotta see this shit going on upstairs." And I get, dragged upstairs, we'll say. And so I go up, and what I witness is Leonardo DiCaprio on his knees next to this very famous television star, whispering in her ear while she masturbated in front of our friends who were crowded around the doorway of my bedroom. So they were laying in my bed doing this. And then off in the corner was Ethan Suplee, and he had with him a video camera, and he videotaped this entire event. And I changed her name. Now, obviously, that is there was a bunch of reasons why it's in the book. Not only is that obviously just awful behavior, especially for somebody his age, in my opinion. I mean, you can get that out of that nonsense out of your system when you're like, in like whatever, in your teens or whatever. But he's a man at that point. He's also a man of reputation, of repute, and certainly. So that was true for Emily Foster. So it was just this really horrible abuse of power.
It adds to that commodifying people as just objects. You can kind of stack them in different ways and move them around and manipulate them because of the power that you have. And these all add, like I say, they all add context to your story and kind of build a fuller picture, don't they? So like you say, it's not just like when we talked earlier on about National Enquirer or whatever, that's the only thing they put in their story. That is their story.
Yeah, and for me it was these people, these men, they want to disparage me, they want to disparage again, this, bear in mind that this book is ultimately a response to their 2 sentences of lies to damage my reputation. And so I just wanted to, if you're going to call into my character, if you're going to call in question my character, then let's look at yours. Let's look at your character. And it's not just Emily Foster, although I found that to be particularly disturbing. RD and I spoke about it a few years back. And the reason was the Emily Foster had come up, and we reached out to each other, and we were like talking about it. And so the reason that incident with Emily Foster is in the book is pretty obvious. It's because it's a terrible abuse of power, in my opinion. But it was also like there was the idea of humiliating somebody sexually for your own pleasure. I felt was something about his character that I felt was was something that needed to be examined in this book. If you're going to destroy the work of others and you're willing to humiliate people in the way that he humiliated Emily Foster, I think people ought to know about it if you're trying to tell a different story, and particularly when you're trying to tell a different story if you're disparaging me in the process. And it also speaks to a lot of where I think he is today. I think there's a point at which his misogyny needs to be addressed, because I don't think it's a healthy thing. This guy's, I've been followed by Leonardo DiCaprio fans for the better part for more than a decade, and they are almost entirely young women. Almost entirely young women. So, what is this? What is going on here? Let's start maybe dealing with the reality of the situation, and not some we're not talking about 25-year-old Jack Dawson anymore. We're talking about a man who's 50 years old and who's still engaged in that same behavior that he was doing back then. And back then it was reprehensible and obviously questionable. So I guess it's in the book for all of those reasons. But I protected Emily Foster's name for reasons that I think are fairly obvious. First of all, I don't know that she wasn't there on her own volition. I mean, I do know that she was there under her own power and her own for her own reasons. And if she wants to come forward, she can. This wasn't about her. People I've seen in chats that try to guess who she is, and it's just a little bit it pisses me off. It's not about her. This is about him and his behavior and what he did, and not about hers. I think that it was something that was important and needed to be addressed, especially when it related to us discussing, one's character.
Yeah, I suppose I need to clarify what I said earlier on, about things being a joke until they're not. I think sometimes, you think of late night TV hosts doing a monologue and they have their standard jokes about certain people. And it might be, like you say, about Leonardo DiCaprio got a cut-off age of women that, and that's, just comedy fodder until if something else comes out that's more disturbing that under the surface. But we had those jokes about other people, and now they're not funny because we know more. And all you can do, I suppose, is add the context from what you've experienced. And if you've experienced it, then that's, I think, makes perfect sense to do so.
The other, I think, interesting part about or the other interesting moment that was captured in that moment where he was with Emily Foster and doing this thing was the dilemma. And that was another reason why it needed to be in the book. We get put in these dilemmas. I'm now suddenly in this position where I've got to make a moral decision. I've got minutes to make it. And in that process, I've got to make that moral decision with what I know to be my entire career at stake. If I choose to interrupt what he's doing in that moment, well, I don't see any crime going on necessarily, right? But I have a moral objection to what's going on, right? Or even, a principled one, which you're in my bedroom, you shouldn't be in my bedroom. In that situation, in that instance, I'm the dilemma, and I think this is an important thing because this is the dilemma that that people are, not just in Hollywood, but where abuses go down. You're in the situation where you're faced with it, and where you're now faced with a choice that you have to make that might cause yourself, your career, your future plans. It's just an interesting moment that I think I felt was important to capture, because I know that that's what people go through in Hollywood constantly. I'm telling you right now that Diddy's parties were filled with people who are now just absolutely mortified that they were anywhere in proximity to it and had no clue, but who, by their association, by photograph or otherwise, are now going to be looked at differently because of their presence, right? Because of their, and here I was in a very similar situation, being exposed to something that I did not want to be exposed to, that I felt was compromising, at least on that level. Yeah, and so I just think it was a really important moment to have in the book for that reason alone. So it wasn't just about his character, although I think that's important as well. But I just wanted to also point that out because, it wasn't just hey, I want to point out that he's a jerk off. It's also there's so much at stake. Her career's at stake. There was just so much going on in that moment. To allow that to happen was, something I think we should.
It's it is a microcosm of what we've we see played out when people do tip over and fall. They fall off their sort of pedestal. like you say, there are all of these moments where it's very easy for people to say, well, I would have done A, B, and C. Yeah, but okay, put yourself in the position when, say your boss at work says, just don't mention this, and everything will be okay. And by the way, have Saturday off. Like
Exactly.
it's just a different scale.
Yeah, or even worse, look the other way, and then, by the way, your application for that promotion is at the top of the pile.
Yeah.
That's where it gets really, really sticky. Like, it's one thing to get like a little, like, here's my, my bag of swag, as opposed to like,
what could happen?
You're in good now. Now you're getting in the room. That's where the leverage is so intense. Like, that's where compromise is easy. That's where compromise happens so very quickly. That's where people get stabbed in the back. That's where people get murdered. Is that moment when there's like that, where the bag is now completely and totally within reach.
Yeah, it's not easy to say things like that, but that's the truth. And I guess it comes back to the title of your book, doesn't it? Like, things get too real.
Yeah.
To speak about these things is too real for some people to listen to, and they'd just rather not.
I've decided to, because I've been like going on. This has been a pleasure, absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
That you've taken this, not only the time to speak with me, but like to read the book and to watch the movie, and I just feel incredibly lucky to share this time with you. I'm so grateful.
Thanks, Dale.
There are a lot of I've done a few interviews now, and I run into a lot of issues of being able to not only clarify my story, but people come in with preconceived notions. They don't do the work. They don't sort of pay attention. And so Angela and my wife and I were sitting around talking, and I've long I taught at the University of Georgia. I taught IP development. Reasonably talented writer. I have a lot of sort of skills and things that I felt like I could offer, and we just started talking about like, well, how could I use those? And so I'm starting a YouTube channel that's actually going to be called Too Real, which is really not about sort of art and life, and like the real, like the real the truth behind it, like the real rawness behind it. And I just wanted to like mention that, because I just love how that title Too Real has really like sort of kind of revealed itself to be so much more than just necessarily something negative. And the experience itself, like this whole experience for me, like first of all, it was incredibly cathartic, right? I mean, I've never healed more than I did writing this book. I just it's an ancillary benefit, because really the goal was to make it entertaining and to make it artful. That was the goal, was to make a story that was worth telling and that was entertaining and artful. But fortunately for me, it also turned out to be, the most thoroughly beneficial therapy I've gone through since going through all of this. I came out of it having lost my depression completely, feeling completely renewed. I'm going to start a YouTube channel that I think is going to be meaningful and helpful and powerful and entertaining, and I'm sort of reborn creatively. So it's just been such an incredible experience, and so I'm so grateful that you found it and that you enjoyed it, and that we're doing great with reviews.
I just want to reiterate to people, that I sat down, I watched Don's Plum first, and then I sat down and I started reading the book, and I should have been in bed. I should have gone to bed. As I say, I'm getting old now. I can't stay up late. And I just kept reading and reading and reading and reading, and my wife was like, "Where are you?" And I think I got halfway through straight after watching the movie, and this was like quite late at night, because I didn't want to stop, because I was in your shoes and I was, I was drawn in, and there was such strange little moments where I was like, this is totally not what I expected. So I think if people do have preconceptions, I would say I'm the voice of someone saying, read it before you make your mind up. If you're the world's biggest fan of Titanic, it might not be for you, but but other than that, if you've got an open mind, read it.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying so. And when I talk about it being artful, I think that when I talk about the movie in forums like this, or sorry, the book in forums like this, it's, we talk about the controversy and we talk about DiCaprio, and for whatever it's worth, the book is really the story of my life, and there's more to my life than those men and what happened in it. And so while that's the core of it, it really is like a journey from, I think what I'm sort of most proud of the book is that, what I really wanted to do was try to put you in my shoes right from the start. Like, let's from landing in America for the, to having the American dream completely destroyed. It's just such an interesting ride in that way, and I really wanted to give people an opportunity to, experience all aspects of it. So yes, you're most of the time in like thrust into this world of young Hollywood, but there's also a bit of Hollywood and Los Angeles and the culture of living in Los Angeles that you get from the book that I think is like warming and and real. And it just it sort of puts everything into perspective, because Hollywood has a way of separating reality, separating itself from reality in our minds and in the way we think of things. And but yet Hollywood is very much a visceral, real, dangerous, enthralling, and wonderful place. And I tried to bring it to life in the book as best I could.
No, I believe that was achieved, definitely. One thing I would say is how there's parity for, lovely moments with people like Jeremy Sisto and Jeff Goldblum, but also moments talking to your family over the phone, like, what, you're in Hollywood? And, these moments for me, showed a real nice balance, because it was, you were open to meeting people, you were open to trying something, you were open to just going and doing, and a lot of people are not. So what I guess what came out of that was lots of things. Don's Plum and now Too Real. So yes, I know the audiobook's is out now. I saw on your
It is
website.
not out. I am in production right now. So and you can hear it. Like it is a.
I'm ruining it.
Yeah, no. I need my voice. Listen to it. It's like it's falling apart. I actually ended up blowing out my mic, so now I've got a new mic coming in. So I have to literally start over, because I have like all. I can't. I have a totally different sonic profile coming in. I went with a different mic. But it is in production. The goal right now is to release it on December 25th. So that's the goal, and I think I'm going to get there. The read, you talked about reading it so quickly. It is a thick book, but one of the reasons it reads so quickly is because my style of writing is very conversational, and I'm deep into dialogue. I think it's probably my best skill as a writer, is that I can really bring characters to life, and I have I guess a talent for conversation in books. And so why I read so quickly is because you can rip through these conversations pretty they flow pretty nicely. And so the audiobook, it records just kind of as easy as it reads. It's just that I gotta I gotta drink enough tea and lemon to keep the vocal cords healthy enough to get through it.
It's funny, I hadn't thought of that until you said it, but I'm of the generation where when I did writing at university, my heroes were like Woody Allen and Kevin Smith, and I would just write dialogue, and all my tutors would just hammer me for it, like nothing happens, nothing's happening, it's just people talking. And it never went down well. And then I'm thinking, I wonder why I connected with this book so much. You've just explained it.
Yeah, well, and that's it. The wonderful thing about like what I've learned to do over the years is, and I think I probably learned it from cutting Don's Plum, because Don's Plum was improvised, and so it was like, is that I've just learned how to sort of like not only harness what I think to be a really natural flow and sort of expose of the character and the subject and the themes, but I've also found ways to like incorporate structure into that, so that there's at the end of the conversation, there's always some kind of either new tension or tension resolved, or like there's some kind of way in which the story and the progress or the character or characters are progressed through the dialogue. And I think sometimes the hardest part of learning it, and this was for me at least, was way back early in my earlier years. You can see behind me over here, actually, there's some screenplays on the shelf there, but those early screenplays, man, they were filled with dialogue that kind of like I thought was great, or had like great potential, but often didn't really like resolve. And so I've just learned to now, like, resolve dialogue. But it is a wonderful way to read. I think it's a wonderful way to create worlds and environments and expressions. We're sitting here, exchanging dialogue. That's what we're doing, and it's sort of what we do first. Language is what really, sort of differentiates us, I think, from, other creatures. And so I like to use it as much as I can in the form of communication.
Yeah, that definitely comes across now. We're talking about particularly, and I'll let you go and save your voice for the audiobook because I want to listen to it. But I was going to say that about the kind of the dialogue and what often I find people who are really good at writing those conversations are really good listeners. And they're taking in and observers of what's going on around them. And I guess that served you well in this as well, because the level of kind of forensic memory of the things that have happened and piecing that together comes across, and that's why it needed to be the length it is, and why it needed to be the book it is. So again, I can just urge people to read it, and I'm going to let you save your voice as well. I'm really conscious now. I'm ruining the audiobook. This guy's.
No, you're good. No. I already burned it out before I even. No, I'm only good for the first 4 hours of the day, and then I think I have like a thing called silent reflux, and I can't seem to get rid of it. But it's like I think there's some acid getting in my esophagus and just wreaking havoc. I'm so thrilled to have been on this. I was so glad when you asked. When you said that you wanted to have me on because you were going to read the book, I thought it was like one of the best opportunities that I've certainly had. So thank you so much for going through all this and spending so much time with me in this project. I certainly hope that it was entertaining for you and for those who are gonna watch this interview. So thank you so much, man. It was a real pleasure. So say that if you want to see Don's Plum and you want to see it in HD, then just go to freedonsplum.com. and throw me your email address. The only reason I'm going through that step, and I may eliminate that, we'll see how things go, but Leo has routinely taken down my my copies of the film because I put up a very high quality copy, and he lets these really horrible copies slide. So I've kept them under private links. So if you want a private link to see Don's Plum in HD, just reach out to me via freedonsplum.com. and I'll send you the link right away. Or I set it up. It's automated now because I'm extremely busy. Normally, I just answer every single email, sometimes by the hundreds. But at this point, they're coming in by the hundreds, and the book has just got me so busy. So if you want to speak to me afterwards, you've seen the movie, you've read the book, you want to talk to me, you can reach out to me at freedonsplum@gmail.com, and answer every single email. So feel free.
Oh, that's great. I hope people do.
Just trying to sort of centralize everything and keep it in one spot, but. freedonsplum.com is sort of easier to remember, and so just if you go there, it'll point to that same spot where you can also pre-order the audiobook if you so choose. They're getting a discount of 25%.
Right.
Coupon.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I was trying to think the same thing. That's right, isn't it? Free. I'm crawling it along about freedonsplum.com.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Great. Yeah, that's great. Perfect. That's absolutely perfect. Well, anyway, man. You're a very cool dude. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Dale. Thanks for your time. I really do appreciate it.
Very happy to be here. Thank you.